Before we dive into today's story, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and send it to a friend who needs to hear it. Now let's begin. Clara Hayes was 48 years old when she thought she had her life neatly stitched together. She lived in a quiet Ohio town where the hum of cicadas filled summer evenings, and neighbors still waved from their porches as if the clock had stopped somewhere back in the 1960s. For years, Clara had poured her heart into her job as the HR manager at a pharmaceutical distribution center. It wasn't glamorous, not the kind of position that would get her name in the paper, but it was steady and respected. And for Clara, who had grown up bouncing between foster homes, steady meant everything. She often reminded herself, "This is the life I built with my own hands," whenever doubt crept in. Her colleagues called her the glue of the team, the one who smoothed over disputes and kept morale from sinking during long shifts. Clara had learned to be strong because she had no other choice. What she never imagined was that a routine doctor's visit for her husband, David Rowan, would become the unraveling thread that pulled her entire life apart. That morning had started like countless others, with Clara brewing a pot of weak coffee and urging David to eat at least a slice of toast. He had been off for months, growing listless and quiet, his appetite vanishing, his once steady hands trembling as though they no longer belonged to him. "We'll get answers today," Clara told herself as she sat in the regional hospital's waiting room, flipping through a dog-eared magazine that smelled faintly of disinfectant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air carried the sharp tang of antiseptic. She figured Dr. Margaret Klein would tweak his medications, maybe refer him to a specialist. Nothing serious, but when a nurse tapped her on the shoulder and murmured, "Mrs. Rowan, the doctor needs to speak with you," Clara's stomach twisted into a knot. The nurse's tight smile suggested this wasn't about a prescription refill. Dr. Klein's office was small, cluttered with medical charts stacked in leaning piles and a wilting plant on the windowsill that spoke of long hours and little time for care. The doctor herself was in her late 50s, her hair streaked with silver and pulled into a neat bun, her eyes carrying both warmth and steel. Clara sat down, her palms sweating. "Is this about David's condition?" she asked, her voice breaking. Dr. Klein leaned forward, folding her hands. "Clara," she began carefully, "you need to protect yourself from David." The word struck Clara like a slap. She blinked in confusion. "Protect myself? From my husband? From the man I married?" The doctor's grave expression silenced her before protests could spill out. "There are things you need to know about his past," Dr. Klein continued softly, "and I'm not certain he's been honest with you about who he really is." Clara's heart pounded in her chest, drowning out the hospital sounds beyond the office door. "I don't understand," she whispered, her mind racing through years of quiet evenings, shared meals, late-night laughter. Dr. Klein's gaze didn't waver. "I've seen David before, years ago in the ER. He came in with a deep cut on his leg after a violent fight. It was connected to a fraud case. He had been arrested for stealing from his ex-wife, her money, her valuables. He even faked dementia to make her lower her guard." Clara's throat went dry. She thought of the scar jagged across David's right leg, the one he had brushed off as an accident. "You're saying he's pretending now?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That he's faking the depression?" Dr. Klein nodded slowly. "His symptoms don't add up, Clara. I've treated depression long enough to see when something is calculated. I fear he's repeating old patterns." Leaving the office, Clara felt the hospital walls closing in on her. Her legs trembled as she walked back through the sterile hallways. Protect herself from David? The idea was unthinkable. He was her husband, the man who had promised her forever. She remembered their courthouse wedding 2 years earlier, the worn carpet beneath their shoes, the shaky pens as they signed the papers. She had felt like she had won the lottery that day, finally finding someone steady to share her life with. How could the man who had held her hand through late-night talks and laughed at her terrible cooking be the same man Dr. Klein described? Yet, when Clara tried to dismiss the warning, memories began resurfacing. The missing car, the drained accounts, his strange detachment. Doubt began to gnaw at her, sharper than any pain she'd known before. Years earlier, before David entered her life, Clara had been content in her solitude. She spent long days managing staff schedules and mediating workplace disputes, followed by evenings with a good book and a cup of tea. Growing up in foster care had taught her to depend on no one but herself. Her boss, Henry Cole, a widower with a kind but lonely heart, often teased her over late-night coffee runs. "Clara, you're going to make me the last bachelor standing," he'd joke. She'd laugh it off, but deep down, the longing for companionship lingered. That longing had driven her to join a matchmaking service, where David Rowan appeared with his crooked smile and quiet charm. He was 52 then, divorced, not interested in children, and like her, yearning for something simple. Cozy dinners, weekend drives, growing old together. It had seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Their courtship was private, woven from quiet coffees at corner cafes and hand-in-hand walks through the park. Clara had convinced herself she had finally found safety. "I don't need grand gestures," she had once told Henry with a shy smile. "Just someone who stays." When she and David married at the courthouse, Henry congratulated her warmly, though she caught a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps loneliness, perhaps worry. But Clara ignored it, too swept up in her joy. Life as newlyweds was modest but sweet. They shared Clara's old sedan, since David didn't own a car, and they settled into a small home outside town. Clara continued working, and David took shifts at a local warehouse. He wasn't talkative, but his presence had felt like a quiet shield, or so she believed. It was about a year into their marriage when the shadows began creeping in. David grew more distant, staring blankly into space during breakfast, his coffee untouched. He forgot small things, mixing up salt for sugar, mismatching socks. Clara teased him lightly, hoping for a smile. "What happened to the man who always noticed my chipped nail polish?" she joked once, but his eyes remained dull. At night, silence filled their home, and Clara found herself speaking just to break the void. "Work was a madhouse today," she'd ramble, her voice too bright. "Henry says I need a vacation, but can you imagine me away from spreadsheets?" David would only nod faintly, lost somewhere she couldn't follow. The emptiness felt heavier with each passing day, like she was living with a ghost. Clara finally urged him to see a doctor when his appetite vanished and his weight began to drop. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch, his hands trembling. "David," she said gently, crouching beside him, "we need to get you help." He nodded without meeting her eyes, whispering, "I'm dragging you down, Clara." Her heart cracked at his words. She booked appointments at a local clinic where a doctor diagnosed him with depression. Clara listened as the doctor explained how depression wasn't just sadness, but a fog that could consume someone whole. "We'll get through this," she told David that night, squeezing his hand. But his condition worsened. He quit his job, spent days in bed, and once wandered off until he called Clara in a panic, lost in their own neighborhood. The fear of losing him completely clawed at her soul. Work became Clara's refuge, the one place she could hold on to normalcy. She threw herself into projects, staying late to mediate disputes and revise handbooks. Henry noticed her exhaustion and once slid an energy drink across her desk. "You're carrying too much, Clara," he said softly. "We're in this together." His words nearly broke her, but she swallowed her tears, determined to endure. Yet the cracks widened. One morning, she discovered their car gone. David swore he hadn't touched it, claiming he had last seen it after a walk. Days later, Clara's heart sank when her bank account showed zero balance. Even their joint savings, money for a new roof, was drained. "David, do you know anything about this?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling. He looked at the ceiling and muttered, "No idea, Clara." The detachment in his voice pierced her. That night, doubt settled in her chest like a storm. Clara tried to brush off the gnawing suspicion that David might be hiding something, but the unease refused to leave her chest. The car's disappearance gnawed at her thoughts. She filed a police report, though the officer's skeptical tone left her feeling foolish. "Could your husband have misplaced it?" he asked, pen hovering. "It's a car, not a pair of socks," Clara snapped before apologizing. At home, she pressed David again, her voice soft but desperate. "David, if you did something, please just tell me. We can fix this together." He only gave her a weary look, muttering, "You think I'd lie to you?" The words should have soothed her, but they rang hollow. When her personal account turned up empty, her hands trembled as she clutched the statement. That account was hers alone. One David shouldn't have been able to touch. "What's happening to us?" she whispered that night into the quiet house, but the silence gave no answer. The weeks blurred into a haze of worry and unanswered questions. Clara leaned on her job more than ever, burying herself in spreadsheets and meetings just to escape the gnawing fear at home. Henry grew more concerned. One afternoon, he stopped by her office with 2 coffees in hand. "Clara, you're not yourself," he said gently. She forced a smile. "Just tired." David still unwell. Henry studied her face, his eyes filled with unspoken questions. She turned away before tears betrayed her. That night, when she returned home, David sat staring at the television, though the screen was blank. "You didn't turn it on?" she asked softly. He didn't respond. Clara stood there, her heart breaking and her mind screaming. Something didn't add up. She wanted desperately to believe he was sick, but every new crack hinted at something darker. It was during one of their visits to the regional hospital that Dr. Klein's words changed everything. After David went in for his checkup, the nurse had fetched Clara again, leading her down the sterile hall to that small, cluttered office. Dr. Klein didn't mince words this time. "Clara, I recognized your husband the moment he walked in. Years ago, I stitched him up after a violent fight with his ex-wife. He wasn't just a patient. He was the subject of a fraud investigation. He manipulated her, faked illness, drained her accounts, and left her broken. I fear he's doing the same to you." Clara's mouth went dry. No, David wouldn't, he couldn't. But the doctor's eyes were steady. "You must protect yourself. This isn't depression, Clara. It's deception." The word echoed in her skull all the way home. That night, Clara sat in the dark living room, her laptop glowing faintly on her lap. The house was quiet, David asleep, or pretending to be, in their bedroom. She thought of Dr. Klein's warning, of the scar David had never explained properly, of the missing car and drained accounts. Tears stung her eyes, but anger surged just as fiercely. She had survived foster homes, loneliness, and hardship. She would not be anyone's fool. With trembling hands, she ordered a set of hidden surveillance cameras online. The next weekend, when David claimed he was too tired to leave the couch, she installed them discreetly around the house, near the front door, the living room, even the bedroom corner. "If I'm wrong, then I'll know for sure," she whispered to herself. But if I'm right, her voice trailed off, replaced by the thud of her racing heartbeat. Days passed, each one a performance. Clara kissed David's cheek in the morning, went to work, smiled through meetings, then came home and cooked dinner like nothing had changed. But every night, once he was asleep, she reviewed the footage on her laptop. At first, nothing unusual appeared, just David's distant silence, his slow movements. But then, one Friday evening, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The footage showed David sneaking out of the house with her favorite silver watch in hand, slipping it into a leather bag. Hours later, he returned, a wad of cash bulging from his pocket, his face curved in a smug grin. Clara replayed it over and over, her chest tightening. This wasn't the broken man she had been nursing. This was someone cunning, deceitful. "Oh, my God," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's playing me." Clara's suspicions hardened into certainty when she checked the footage from the day the car disappeared. There was David, perfectly steady, climbing into the driver's seat and pulling out of the driveway while she was at work. He returned hours later on foot, looking disheveled, pretending he had been home all along. Clara slammed her laptop shut, her pulse hammering. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound she'd carried from childhood. She had loved him, defended him, carried their household when he faltered, and he had turned her compassion into a weapon against her. For hours, she sat in the dark living room, her body trembling between rage and grief. Finally, she whispered to herself, "He doesn't get to destroy me. Not me. Not again." The next morning, Clara called in sick to work. Henry's voice on the line was gentle. "Take all the time you need, Clara. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." She hung up, clutching the words like a lifeline. Then she gathered every piece of evidence, camera footage, bank statements showing the drained accounts, pawn shop receipts she tracked down from online searches, and a list of missing valuables. By the afternoon, she was driving a rental car to the county courthouse, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Filing for divorce felt like cutting away a piece of her soul, but each signature was a step toward freedom. "He lied to me, but he won't keep me," she murmured under her breath as she signed the final line. Her next stop was the police station, a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and old paper. Officer Jenkins, a gruff man with tired eyes, listened skeptically at first. "You're saying your husband staged all this? The car, the money." Clara slid her laptop across the counter and pressed play. Jenkins's expression shifted as he watched David sneak out with her belongings and later smirk with cash in hand. "All right," he muttered, scribbling notes. "This is serious." Clara handed over every shred of evidence she had. By evening, the police had located her car at a used lot across town, sold under a false name. Pawn shops confirmed her watch and bag had been sold by David. Receipts timestamped to match her footage. His fraud conviction from a decade ago sealed the case. That evening, Clara returned home with 2 officers at her side. David was sprawled on the couch flipping through a magazine, his face arranged in feigned exhaustion. When the officers stepped inside, his eyes widened. "Clara, what's going on?" he stammered. Clara held up the divorce papers, her voice steady though her heart raced. "It's over, David. I know what you've done." His mask slipped instantly, panic flashing across his face. "You don't understand. My depression." "Stop," Clara snapped. "You faked it all. The car, the money, my trust. You used me." The officers cuffed him as Jenkins read his rights. For the first time, Clara saw real fear in David's eyes, not weakness or sickness, but the terror of a man exposed. As the police car pulled away, Clara stood alone in the quiet living room, the echoes of betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Her knees nearly buckled, but she steadied herself, clutching the papers in her hand. She thought of the years she had poured into believing in him, the tears shed, the sleepless nights filled with worry. All of it had been lies. Yet beneath the sorrow, a fierce relief spread through her chest. He was gone. He couldn't hurt her anymore. She whispered to herself, "I'm not broken. I'm free." That night, as the cicadas hummed outside her window, Clara sat at her kitchen table and allowed herself to cry, not out of weakness, but out of release. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest spark of hope flicker back to life. The days after David's arrest were a blur of paperwork, court hearings, and late nights staring at the ceiling. Clara didn't attend the hearings. She couldn't bear to see him again. Instead, she focused on her own survival, piecing together a life he had tried to dismantle. Her colleagues rallied around her at work. They slipped notes of encouragement on her desk, invited her to lunches, and kept her coffee cup full. Henry was especially present, checking in without intruding. "You're tougher than you think, Clara," he told her one afternoon as they walked out of the building. She smiled faintly, realizing how much his steady presence had carried her when she hadn't even asked for it. The divorce dragged on for months, tangled with David's fraud charges. But when the judge's gavel fell and Clara's name was called free, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She stepped out of the courthouse into crisp morning air, closing her eyes and whispering, "It's over." That night, she drove home to her small house, no longer haunted by his lies, and sat quietly at her kitchen table with a glass of tea. The silence that once felt crushing now seemed comforting, a reminder that peace could exist without pretense. Later that week, during lunch at work, Henry slid into the chair across from her, his usual hot dog in hand. "Clara," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I think you'd do just fine with someone like me." Clara nearly dropped her sandwich, startled by the unexpected words. He gave her a small smile, eyes steady. "I'm serious." She didn't answer right away, but a warmth stirred inside her that she hadn't felt in years. That evening, Clara sat in her kitchen, staring at her phone, the cicadas singing outside her window. She thought of Henry, his quiet humor, his steady support, his kindness when her world had been falling apart. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she typed a message. "Henry, are you free for dinner this weekend?" For a moment, her thumb hesitated above the send button, nerves buzzing. Then she pressed it and let out a shaky laugh. Whatever came next, she was ready. She had faced betrayal, uncovered lies, and clawed her way back to freedom. She wasn't just Clara, the foster kid who had once feared the rug would be pulled out from under her. She was Clara Hayes, a woman who had survived the storm and stepped into a new beginning. Outside, the night hummed with promise, and for the first time in a long while, she believed in tomorrow. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.